Well, hello and welcome to the Andrew Eborn Show, where we rip through the headlines and tackle the issues shaking up Britain with no filter and no fear. Today, I'm delighted to be joined yet again by Ben Habib, the former MEP and Reform UK Deputy Leader, now spearheading the Integrity Party with a mission to challenge the establishment. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Good morning. Good to see you, Andrew. Thank you for having me on.
It's always a pleasure to see you. But some terrible news. I mean, overnight we saw the appalling images from Liverpool, the victory parade, which turned to carnage. You demanded on your social media post that the British people should be told who's behind the Liverpool attack, claiming that the system protects perpetrators over citizens. How important do you think it is that the police were quick to announce that a 53-year-old white British man had been arrested? It was an incident not being treated as terrorism. How important was that compared to what happened with Southport?
Do you remember with Southport, they also said that it was an incident not linked to terrorism to start with. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And this is the
and
concern when it rings in the ears, doesn't it? We're
yeah,
reminded very, very quickly about that sort of stuff. But they're obviously trying to avoid the riots again by saying it's a white
yeah.
British man who's a local.
But they didn't say that it was a white 53-year-old man who was arrested for driving through the crowds. They said a white 53-year-old man had been arrested. And forgive me if I'm a bit cynical, but I want words of one syllable which are completely clear to be understood. We had deflection from the Prime Minister with Axel Ruda claiming he was a Welshman. And by no account was Axel Ruda Welsh, not in the colloquial sense in which we use that term. He was a second generation Rwandan. He may hold a British passport, but he was not Welsh in that colloquial sense. He's not a man that you would think of standing outside in his field with his sheep. He was, as I say, a second generation Rwandan, and now we discover had been reported to the police a number of times for his inclination for violence. And actually, at the time that the deflections were being given to us by the police and by the Prime Minister, they already knew that he was in possession of Al Qaeda workbooks and ricin, and the guy was a complete terrorist, frankly. And so I want to see how this unfolds. I don't believe that. Well, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that a 53-year-old white man would get in a car and drive it through a crowd in Liverpool. I just find that hard to believe.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And again, the truth will unfurl. There's all sorts of posts on social media, whether how on earth he got down to that street, which was closed off anyway. So, what would you like the government to do then?
I want an unequivocal statement about what they know, which is, uh, who drove the car? Is the white man they've arrested, the white 53-year-old man as they describe him, is he the one who drove the car? Um, and, what were his motives? What are their theories about it? And it's not sufficient for them to hide behind, oh, well, now a police investigation is taking place. We can't say anything. That's not sufficient. We need to know. We, the people, don't trust the government and the authorities anymore because they've misled us in the past. And so we want words of one syllable that are utterly clear.
And you're absolutely right. That's I always say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and trust in the media, trust in the police, trust in government is at an all-time low. But at the same time, justice needs to be done. Everybody's entitled to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. How do you balance that?
Well, that's fine, but nothing about the identity of Axel Rudu Cabana, the disclosure about his identity and some of the things of which he was in possession, or indeed the ferocity of his crimes would have prejudiced that trial. I don't accept that. These were simply facts. The girls were found, one of them stabbed 125 times, and an attempt to remove her head. Another one, I think, 80 odd times, and the third one is a similar number. And this was the second generation Rwandan. I'm going by that example. I'm using that as my exemplar, if you like, because there was clear deception by the authorities over it. And all these things that we now know about Axel Rudakabana, if we had known then, would not have prejudiced the case. They're just statements of fact. Statements of fact don't prejudice a case. Um, the number of times a child is stabbed is a fact. The identity and his ethnicity is a fact. And these were hidden from the people, and we knew something was not right. And again, here, I suspect something's not right because the language used to describe the arrest of this individual is not clear. It is ambiguous.
Okay, well, we'll see how that unpacks. So the other big news today is Tommy Robinson's just been released from prison, but he faces new accusation of harassment caused by fear of violence against two journalists in August 2024. We've spoken about Tommy beforehand. Is he a champion of free speech or a far-right provocateur whose actions fuel dangerous rhetoric? What's your view, Ben?
I'm not interested in talking about Tommy Robinson, the man. I'm only interested in talking about individuals insofar as they are examples or represent the state of the country. So, when you talk about Tommy Robinson and the political motivation for his incarceration, and I believe he was a political prisoner, I also believe similarly that Lucy Connolly is a political prisoner. And I believe that Peter Lynch himself was also incarcerated with political motives. Indeed, I would say many of the people, we've come back to Southport again, it's interesting that, but many of the people incarcerated after the protests in Southport are effectively political prisoners because it was the Prime Minister who directed the criminal justice system against them. So to the extent that Tommy Robinson represents a miscarriage of justice, he is of interest to me. But as an individual, he's no more interest to me than you are or anyone else, frankly, Andrew. I love you to bits, but you know what I mean from a political perspective. It's not the point. I think people are very keen on both sides of the debate to are you pro or anti Tommy Robinson? It's not about Tommy Robinson. It's about what's happened to him and how it happened and why it happened. And that argued those arguments apply equally to anyone.
Yeah, and as we often say, it's sort of sunlight is the best disinfectant. Actually, shining
Absolutely.
a whole thing on the reasons for Tommy being incarcerated. You and I agree that we think the punishment was too long, but the court made it clear that if he deleted the particular video, then his sentence would be reduced. He'd come out earlier. So there was no surprise there, was there?
No, no surprise. Of course, he was incarcerated for showing the video. That was the offending act because it breached the injunction. But the reason I felt he was a political prisoner was because that breach was a breach of a civil action. And it was the horrible, despicable, wretched Lord Hermer who intervened in the case and effectively elevated it into a criminal action against Tommy Robinson. And, incarceration then became a possibility and then a reality.
Yeah, you've also slammed Britain's two-tier justice system, mocking Nasrallah, lands you in cuffs, but glorifying Hamas goes unpunished. Are we sprinting into authoritarianism, and if so, who's to blame?
We absolutely are sprinting into authoritarianism, coincident with the shutting down of free speech. And my, I've thought a great deal about how it is that our once free country has got to this point. And for me, it is paradoxically, it's unbridled liberalism which has got us here. The belief that the individual can do whatever they wish to do, including, obviously, in the case of ethnic minorities, practice their religions, their cultures, their beliefs, etc. In the United Kingdom, and that we must put a protective blanket around them, promote, celebrate their beliefs and their values and their culture. And if you are to do that, and if you are to set aside, therefore, the interests of the majority, you have to muzzle the majority because the majority want their culture. Well, the British, as we were a free-speaking nation that understood where it came from and understood what British values were, and we weren't repeatedly having to, define what it means to be British. It was taken for granted, and now we find ourselves in this peculiar world where, when we say, the majority's interests are being set aside and minority, particularly certain ethnic minorities, are having their interests promoted and above, and to the detriment of the majority. They go, well, what does it mean to be British? You define it, and they try to codify everything. And in that process, effectively, they're shutting you down. So freedom of speech on the altar of liberalism is being sacrificed.
Yeah, and I think that that's so important. And the whole point about justice, it's supposed to be blind, and we see this horrendous sentences that are going for what we classify as freedom of speech. So the Lucy Connolly case is a classic example. 31 months for her. I personally believe, and I've made this very public, that she should never have pleaded guilty to incitement. What's your view on that?
I agree. She should never have pleaded guilty to incitement. And the same goes for Peter Lynch, who also said and held a plaque. He said things and held a placard with some conspiracy theories on it, but he wasn't charged with what he said. The charge was basically of violence, and he pleaded guilty. And I think a lot of these people probably felt, let's just get this out of the way, move on. Maybe they were given bad advice. Probably in the case of Peter Lynch, he didn't have much advice at all. This is that he was a 61-year-old man with no previous criminal record, probably incredibly stressed out at the time of receiving the charge and being questioned and whatnot. I mean, it's clear miscarriage of justice in my view. And for the Prime Minister to get up and say, well, I don't really know the Lucy Connolly case. I can't comment on the specifics of the case. I can only talk about the need for free speech and people shouldn't use that as a means to incite violence. Is a lie. Of course, he knows about the Lucy Connolly case. Even JD Vance knows about the Lucy Connolly case. Everyone does, you know.
No,
So he's
yeah,
lying. So we know the Prime
you're
Minister's a liar.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. And the other point that I would make is that people should never plead guilty if they're not. And I don't know what legal advice they receive, but often it will be, and it's a statement of fact, that if you plead guilty early enough, it does reduce your sentence. But if you're not guilty, don't be
Don't
tempted
do
by
it.
it.
I agree. Don't hold your ground. Absolutely.
Okay. Us look at the Chagos Islands. I mean, you called that deal a complete surrender of
It
British
is.
territory. Why is this betrayal so critical, and what does it mean for Britain's place on the world stage?
Well, we've seen betrayals like this before. This is not unique. Um, the first betrayal of which I was directly involved was the betrayal of Northern Ireland, leaving it behind in the European Union. And, we succumbed, the British nation, the British government succumbed to false arguments made by international institutions and the Republic of Ireland that by putting a border on the island of Ireland, we would somehow um, breach the international agreement, emphasis on the word international agreement, that is the Good Friday Agreement. So which, by the way, is wrong. It's not true. The Good Friday Agreement recognizes the border there, but through some peculiar, weak intellectual cartwheeling, we ended up partitioning the United Kingdom. And we've done it with Chagos. And if you read the Chagos Agreement, I really highly recommend people read it. If you don't want to read the whole thing, read the first page. The first page basically says we should never have been there in the first place. We're really bad people. We owe you reparations, and we're going to hand the islands back, and we're going to recompense you for all the damage we've done. That's effectively the way the document is crafted. What's called the recitals to an agreement, the foundations of why this agreement was entered into, is a completely wrong admission from the British government that the Chagos Islands were wrongly ours, that they were rightly Mauritian, belonged to Mauritius, and that we had caused, huge damage to people across the world, as far as I could see in that document, and that reparations were due. And then, if you were then minded to read the rest of the document, you will see that there are no quid pro quos. We hand over the territory in Article 1 of that document. It's two lines, and Chagos becomes theirs. And then the rest of the document is all about the other things that we're going to do for them, looking after the islands, looking after the environment, paying them hundreds of millions of pounds over the next 100 years, making sure that we forewarn them if we're going to launch any military action from the islands, and so on and so forth. It's a complete capitulation. It's the kind of document that you would write if you were defeated in war. You were defeated in war and you were saying, right, okay, I give up. Please don't kill any more of my own people. Have these islands back. And no shots were fired. It is a complete capitulation of British political will and sacrificing British interests, again, in the pursuit of some kind of crazy international pursuit of ingratiating ourselves with the international community, in this case, the International Court of Justice of the UN, and this self-flagellation of our past. And I think we need to stop this. Our past is something of which we should be very, very proud. Even though the document talks about the ills perpetrated by us, it doesn't specify what those ills are. It just makes a blanket statement.
You know,
It's just, it's
but
abominable.
so what can people do? There is this sort of petition at the moment. It's not quite a done deal yet. What can people do?
Well, we should sign the petition. I've written an article, which I hope will be published this morning on the subject, setting out what I just mentioned to you. And we need to make as much noise about it as possible. And if Kemi Badenoch hears this broadcast, what I would ask her to do is stand up in Parliament and ask every member of the Labour Party sitting on the opposite benches to declare whether or not they personally support handing Chagos over by a show of hands. And she should stand there silently until she gets a show of hands, because it's not sufficient for the Labour Party to hide behind the lobbying voting process. They need to be seen to be doing this to the detriment of the United Kingdom. They should be forced on camera to show that they are handing over British territory for no good reason to a foreign power.
Yeah. Okay. A good call to action there. You've also accused Keir Starmer of surrendering to the EU, handing back power to foreign courts and betraying Brexit. How far has the sell out gone, and can Britain ever take back control?
So the first thing to say is that Brexit was sold out from the day we voted to leave. Every prime minister since then has sought to betray Brexit, and Boris Johnson did betray Brexit. We did not get Brexit, and I just explained how Northern Ireland was left behind. We also hitched ourselves to the hip with the EU in state aid, employment, competition, environmental law. We committed in the trade agreement with the EU to stay in the ECHR. We committed to pay hundreds of millions of pounds into the European Defence Fund, believe it or not. Back in 2020, we entered into that agreement and recognise the European arrest warrant so that we can't even protect our own citizens in this country if a European court issues an arrest warrant for them, and so on and so forth. What Starmer has done is just built on the betrayal. It's not that he has betrayed Brexit and we otherwise had Brexit. He's just built on the betrayal, and he's taken us even closer back into the EU. So, in terms of the things that he's done, aligning us with them on sanitary and phytosanitary regulations basically means that we will have to take all new laws that the EU passes as far as agricultural products are concerned, and it'll be the European Court of Justice, a foreign court that will adjudicate those matters in the United Kingdom. That is a betrayal of our sovereignty. He has basically, the details are a bit vague at the moment, but he's basically moving towards agreeing to freedom of movement for the youth across Europe and that will be used mostly for European youth to come to the UK. It won't be us going there. And the quid pro quo that he thinks is so brilliant is that we don't have to queue when we go to immigration in Europe. I mean, who cares? I would gladly queue for 20 minutes if it preserved British sovereignty. I mean, to talk about the e-gates as a win because he's giving up our borders to the EU is absolutely absurd. And then, of course, the really big sellout in that. And again, it's couched slightly ambiguously, but the really big sellout is this closer cooperation, military cooperation with the European Union, which is effectively signing up to uh, permanent structured cooperation projects, which involves us effectively endorsing all EU foreign policy. So we won't be able to stand against the EU on foreign policy. And then this military cooperation on a day-to-day basis through things like the European Defence Fund will result eventually in our military being inextricably enmeshed in the European military through what they call interoperability. So we will use all the same software, the hardware, all the control systems. We won't be able to act independently as a fighting force outside the European arena without their blessing. And he's effectively subjugating our military to Brussels. That's the path on which he has now taken us. And I think that's words fail me. How can you describe that? That is a complete surrender, isn't it, of the United Kingdom? So in that agreement, he's agreed to take foreign laws adjudicated by a foreign court, to take down our borders for the youth, and to hand over our military to Brussels. I mean, what is that if not a surrender? And
Yeah.
he did all of that, the immigration thing. He did the youth or headed towards the youth scheme in the same week in which he recognized that immigration needed to be brought under control, or we would end up in a land of strangers. The man is all over the place. He cannot be trusted. He is a serial liar. And he is fundamentally anti-British. The Chagos deal reveals how fundamentally anti-British he is, and so does the deal that he's just done with the European Union.
Yes, and fishing. I mean, when he said he was going to stop.
Fishing, I forgot about fishing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, when he said he was going to stop the boats, we didn't think he was going to. He meant he was going to stop our fishing boats. So it's destroying the industry for us, isn't it? With 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry was destroyed anyway, frankly, Andrew. I was thinking of standing as an MP in Hastings, and I wanted to look up what proportion of Hastings' GDP comes from the fishing industry. And it may not surprise you to know, but it surprised me. I was horrified that 0% of its GDP comes from fishing, because even though I grew up thinking of Hastings as a great fishing port, actually it's been utterly decimated through the common fisheries policy and then what we've done, with the European Union since. And that applies right across the United Kingdom. Um, and, just on the fishing point, we saw over the weekend the French impound a British fishing boat because it had apparently strayed into French waters. And instead of that should be a diplomatic incident. The Prime Minister should be hopping up and down saying, "You release our British boat." Not a peep out of the Prime Minister. In fact, the declaration that came from government was that we can't interfere in this matter while an investigation is on. A French investigation is ongoing. I don't care about the French investigation. It's a British boat. The Prime Minister should be thumping the table saying, "I don't care about your judicial process. Release our boat." Do you
Yeah.
not think?
Yeah, well,
I mean, this would have.
absolutely. Very, very clear on that. He needs to be a lot tougher, and as you
Yeah.
say, put Britain first. I want to look at a couple of other policies. Two-child benefit cap. You've said that having children obviously comes with financial responsibilities. Pushing back on reforms called to scrap the two-child benefit cap. Is this about promoting work over welfare, or are families getting a raw deal?
So just put this into context. The single biggest budget payment we make at the moment is to welfare and benefits. I think we're paying about 350 billion a year for welfare and benefits, and it's rising. The NHS bill is about 240 billion a year at the moment. So it's significantly bigger than what we are paying for the NHS. And all this does by removing the two children cap is encourage those people who are not working necessarily to have more children. That is not just irresponsible from a budgetary perspective for the nation. I think it's inculcating and encouraging really bad behavior. Having children is a decision that needs to be taken very seriously. You're bringing, they say a puppy isn't just a dog for Christmas or whatever the expression is.
Yeah.
Children is just marginally more serious than that, isn't it? And to be encouraging those who can't afford to have children to have them at the state's cost, I think is fundamentally bad thinking. I totally agree, however, that we should be encouraging people, British citizens, to have children so that we can wean ourselves off this cheap imported unskilled labor, which is damaging us so greatly, both culturally as well as economically. But you do that through providing tax release by encouraging people to work, so that if you are working, you get the relief required in order to have a child, because you are already part of the working force. You're contributing to the United Kingdom. But if you're not, if you're on benefits, you should absolutely not have the right to have another child or four or five children at the state's expense. Absolutely not.
Okay. Tony Blair, a recent speech about him, you say that his liberal revolution crushed democracy and broke Britain. What's the worst damage he's caused, and how do we fix it?
So just about everything he did was disastrous for the United Kingdom. The creation of the Supreme Court, the passing of the Human Rights Act, the giving of independence to the Bank of England, the Equalities Act, the Climate Change Act, everything that he did was awful from a constitutional perspective, and it all needs to be reversed.
Okay. So everything basically.
Everything. Tony Blair is the master of all our disasters. He is the devil. If there's one individual who is more responsible for damage to the United Kingdom than any other, it's Tony Blair. We had a very sophisticated, uh, unwritten constitution, democratic constitution in this country, which had evolved over hundreds of years. And Tony Blair went on a spree of reforms, a priori, as I would say, spree of reforms, unthought through, unpracticed, without any ability to reverse if they didn't work. And he experimented disastrously at the cost of our democracy. And the liberalism to which I referred at the beginning of this program, how liberalism has shut down free speech, the foundations for that come from Tony Blair and the establishment of the Human Rights Act, and then obviously built on by the Equalities Act and progressive discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. No, Tony Blair was just an absolutely wretched human being, is a
Okay.
wretched human being. Yeah.
Talking about other colourful language, you've spoken very publicly about your views on Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe. Obviously, the police are no longer investigating him. There is still the outstanding thing about the suggestion about dementia, the appalling suggestion about dementia. What's the latest on that?
On Rupert Lowe,
Yes.
I mean, you'd have to ask him precisely what the latest is, but I understand that uh, uh, a further letter has been written to Farage and others because they didn't adequately respond to the initial letter, and more time has been given for them to respond. But it seems extraordinary to me, and it should seem extraordinary to any right-minded individual that having made a false police having made a police complaint, I won't say false just for the sake of this discussion, having made a police complaint which the police decided not to pursue, that there hasn't been at least an apology forthcoming from Zia Youssef and Reform UK. Reform UK made a public statement about that police complaint, and Zia Youssef and Nigel Farage need to discover, they need to do a bit of introspection and discover their own moral compass and issue an apology on that specific point alone, if nothing else.
Okay. We previously spoke about the Integrity Party and making it different, a credible, democratic, and honest alternative. What's the latest on that?
So on the integrity, just to say the name will change. That is a name that was adopted by the two gentlemen who set the party up in the first place. But when we launched the new website, which is round the corner, and we launched the constitution and effectively, therefore, the party, you will have a new name. And that launch is coming soon, very soon.
Okay. And when you say very soon, what sort of time frame we're talking about?
A month.
Okay, very good. We've also spoken about Elon Musk. Errol Musk, a regular on the Andrew Eborn Show, is now in London. I'll be having him on the show a little bit later. Is Elon Musk involved at all? Have you had discussions with him about the Integrity Party?
I don't want to breach any confidences about discussions I may or may not have had with Elon Musk, if that's all right, Andrew.
Of course, I mean, but you would welcome, I presume, any support from his side.
I think I know that Elon Musk fears greatly for Western civilization, and I know that he doesn't see reform as the answer for the same reasons that I don't see reform as the answer, which is very sad, by the way. It is very sad because it would be blooming lovely if Farage could get his act together and do the right thing. But I know he doesn't see reform and Farage as being the answer. And I also know, as I think we all do, that he's got a spot of bother with Tesla and a few other things at the moment that he needs to sort out. And so we'll just see what Elon Musk does. But I know his sympathy is very greatly with the United Kingdom and our desire, your desire, our desire, our collective desire to re-establish, restore our constitution, our free speech, our democracy, and our economic prosperity.
Okay. Finally, we talked about fragmenting the vote in terms of having these different parties fighting with each other on the right side of politics. Some suggestion has been about bringing Boris back. Finally, let's just have your views on that.
I would not bring Boris back in a month of Sundays. He's a great guy to have a drink with in a bar, I'm sure, but he did a lot of damage as Prime Minister.
Okay, so what would unite the right if that's the right thing to do?
There's no such thing as the right. It's a misconception, frankly. I mean, the real debate, the real schism in politics is between those of us who actually believe in the United Kingdom, want it governed domestically with British interests and British people's interests being put first, and those like Keir Starmer and the vast majority of parliamentarians who see some kind of liberal global order associations with the EU, the International Court of Justice, the UN, as being of greater importance, and domestic quangos, experts, bureaucrats. They vest their hopes in these individuals, which is fundamentally anti-democratic and anti-British because it strips power away from Parliament. I want Parliament to be vested with the authority with which then we can hold them responsible. Because if they've got the authority, then we can hold them responsible. If they don't have the authority, then we're disarmed and we just have to think, oh goodness, that was international law that defeated it. Oh, that was a domestic quango that said we couldn't do this. Oh, the expert said this, that, and the other, so we can't do the right thing for the UK. No, I want all the power back in Parliament, and so when they screw up, we can actually hold them to account and say, well, you screwed up.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to hold people to account. But just to
Yeah.
deal finally with that point about fragmenting the vote, people who might be minded to vote Conservative or might be minded to vote whatever you call your new party or might be minded to vote Reform, clearly that vote is every single one of those is one which would be against Labour. So why wouldn't you want to unite the right?
Okay, I mean, you refer to it as the right again. Farage, for example, is today, I think, right now, as we're speaking, lifting in his, it would be disclosing a policy for Reform UK, which would lift the restriction on just having benefits for people with two children. I mean, I think that's fundamentally economically illiterate, and I couldn't possibly support that. He's also prepared to consider the repatriation of Shamima Begum. I find that abhorrent. He also has declared that he's not in favor of deporting everyone that entered the country illegally, which I think fundamentally undermines any prospect of deterring people from coming to the UK. Because unless you're prepared to deport everyone that's here illegally, you send a message that actually, if you slip through, you might just stand a chance of staying. And then many other things that Farage has said and done that I think make him frankly, a false hope. As I mentioned, I think Elon Musk sees that as well. And the Conservative Party, well, the Conservative Party is the Conservative Party, and they're basically still Liberal Democrats. I haven't seen anything out of the Conservative Party to indicate that they have rediscovered their conservative DNA. I was hoping that they would. Frankly, Andrew, I don't really care who does what's required to be done, whether it's Farage and Reform, or whether it's Kemi Badenoch and the Tories, or whether it's us in this new party that's launched. I don't care who does it. I would rather Farage and Kemi Badenoch did it, because then I could go back to my normal life. But they clearly are not going to do it. That's what I see. I see real issues with Farage. For the reasons just explained, and I see real issues with the Conservatives. And it's not a matter of uniting them. We've got to have a political force that is actually going to deliver for the country. We've got to have an agenda that is sensible. We've got to lead with a narrative, lead with an ideology, and see if we can carry the British people to that position. Farage is all over the place. He's all over the place. He talks about the need to be an independent sovereign country, and at the same time, he's prepared to take Shamima Begum back. How does that figure? He won't talk about Northern Ireland. Sorry, he won't back for Northern Ireland. He won't. How can if he can't even define what the United Kingdom is, how can he be the answer? How can he be the Messiah that's going to save us?
No, I understand that, and I know you're resisting the thing about uniting the right because that is just a label, but it's an alternative to Labour. That's the point. And if people got a choice of about three different alternatives, that's going to fragment the vote. So how do
But
they
the
get over
reason
this? What's the solution?
But one of the reasons we're in the trouble we're in is because people have always said, oh, vote Conservative because otherwise you get Labour and it's awful. No, there's got to be a reason to vote for a political party, a positive reason. You've got to believe in them and want to vest your vote in them because you think that they're going to save the country or that they're going to deliver economic prosperity and so on. And we've got to stop this obsession with the lesser of all evils. We need to have a vision that's bright and beautiful so people can vote for it. So it's not about uniting the right. I don't believe any of these parties, Reform, Tories, Liberal Democrats, Labour, none of them, Greens, none of them offer what's required to save this country.
Okay. Ben Habib, as always, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Very straightforward answers to very straightforward questions. Look forward to having you back on very, very soon.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's edition of the Andrew Eborn Show. Don't forget you can subscribe. Follow me at Andrew Eborn at Octopus TV, and do on more platforms than Paddington. Do press that subscribe button now. Lots of exciting stuff. We have Errol Musk in town. All sorts of revelations coming up about him and what the next stage might be for Elon as well. And if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can reach out for me through the usual platforms. But for me, for now, thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.